Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this podcast and just what your class is really doing and St. Thomas to make a difference. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. So let's get started. So who are you and what do you do?
Well, that is a loaded question, but I will try to answer this correctly. I am what is considered a human trafficking specialist or a human victims advocate. And so what that basically means is I really understand human trafficking. I understand that there is a complex trauma behind it. And how to really help victims cope after they are being recovered. There's just so many elements that go into human trafficking. And so I do not just do the advocacy part. What I do is I also study trafficking trends and the different ways of trafficking so that when a child or a person goes missing, we have more of an idea where we can look to find them.
Wow. Okay, so how did you get into human trafficking?
So I got into human trafficking 21 years ago. I had decided to make a film called Not in My Backyard, and I thought that it was going to be about domestic violence, and I thought it was only going to be a year, but it ended up being 7 years where I went across America to really study the organizations and shelters and safe havens that were breaking the cycle of violence, but really also perpetuating the cycle of violence. And along my journey in those 7 years in those cities, I kept on meeting teenagers that they were labeling as child prostitutes. And we know that children cannot be prostitutes. Even if they think that they're consenting, they are a victim and they're being manipulated. So when I got back home, I sat down with my mentor and I said, in all these different cities, there are these teens that are being bought and sold, and a lot of them are in the foster care industry. Like, have you ever heard about this? And she said, oh, that's human trafficking. And so from there, my life changed, and I just could not shake what was happening to those kids. And I couldn't shake that people were not outraged yet about it or hadn't known, and that became like my mission.
Very awesome.
Thank
so,
you.
Okay, you've told us who you are. You told us what you do. Now, the big question is, what is human trafficking?
Okay, so the clinical term of human trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. And I know that we're going to talk about all these clinical definitions, but I'd like to just make things really simple for people, because when people hear about human trafficking, they think it can never really happen. Mm-hmm. And really, human trafficking is like a sexual aggression and a sexual violence where people are being forced to have sex, or they are being coerced, or there is fraud in it. So I'll give you an example with the fraud part. Fraud is you think you're coming over to the United States to get a job. I get you here under false pretenses, and now once you're here, you have to have sex. They call it debt bondage, that you owe these people money to bring that brought you here, but you came on false pretenses. Coercion, and force are pretty, you can kind of figure all of those things out. But it's such an easy way. It's not like in the movie Taken, where people are abducted in a van. I know that we've talked about that before. I will tell you just a few different scenarios. So for youth, if I'm going to want to sex traffic you or commercial sexual exploitation. With youth, it is different because adults, to some degree, if it can be consensual, if it is consensual. With the youth, you can never consent to having sex with an adult or being sold, even if you think, this is what I want to do and this is what I know. We know that the brain isn't fully developed until people are 25. So with youth, if I go onto your school campus or I see a picture of you on Instagram and I decide, I really like this girl, she's very pretty, I can make hundreds of thousands of dollars off of her. I can sell her 20 to 30 times a day. Well, now I need to get to know you. And so a lot of times how it's working on high school campuses in America is, if it isn't done digitally, it's done where I have another child on your school campus recruit you. So if you're a 15-year-old, I'm going to bring in like a 17-year-old or a 15-year-old And if it's a boy and I know your vulnerabilities and you don't have a dad at home and your mom is working 3 jobs, we all have different vulnerabilities. Every single one of us, we're human beings, we have vulnerabilities. It is a predator's job to prey and to find out what are those vulnerabilities of those people and then exploit them. And then during that process is the grooming process. And the grooming process is, I need to change you and mold you into what I need for you to become. So I need to isolate you from your parents. Mm-hmm. I need to isolate you from your friends. I need to isolate you from if you love a sport or you love to dance or you love to sing. Anything that you love and identify with, I need to isolate you from that. So isolation and alienation is very important. Then I also want to introduce you to a substance so that you become either addicted to that substance or under that substance, you do things that I can record you with and blackmail you with or show you, look at the things that you have done. So with the grooming process, the predator's job is to strip you of your identity and strip you of your identity so bad that once you are stripped from it and you are broken, it is too painful to even go back to who you used to be. So if you went to Sunday school every day and you were in church or you were in the choir or you were this amazing athlete or you were just a regular kid, the goal is, besides changing your whole identity, is I know now I'm not that person. I know I'm never going to be that person again. And the shame and guilt that I feel for the things that I have done, because that's also the other part of grooming is, and with children is, I'm going to feel guilty. I lied to my parents about going to that party. I lied to my parents about talking to this boy. And this is a part of the grooming process is it's a master of manipulation. And it is a slow mental manipulation of completely dismantling and dysregulating a person until they become under all of your control, where they are not only going to do everything that you tell them to do, but they're going to have this trauma bond with you where they are bonded to you and they feel like you are the only person that knows them and that you know them better than they even know themselves. That does happen with adults too.
You know, when you mention the schools, mm-hmm. So I have 4 kids, right? When you mention the school, you mentioned that the grooming process can start in school. What is there out there now that can protect my daughter, my son at school from human trafficking? From
commercial exploitation and trafficking. So I'll break down a little bit too of commercial sexual exploitation since we're talking about kids. So commercial sexual exploitation is also child sexual abuse material, also known as child pornography. We don't use the word child pornography because pornography is legal, and we don't want anyone to identify with pornography in children as being legal. Okay. So if someone videotapes your child with pictures, or your child sends a boy or a girl, because we live in a day and age where our children communicate differently. Literally, we have systematically groomed our kids to communicate everything via technology. So if I have a boyfriend and we're sexting, which is, I want to kiss you, and it elaborates into more things. And then we'll send me a pic, and then that means send me a picture of with you in your bra, and then it slowly goes further. The kids think, well, this is someone that loves me and I love them. And then that kid gives it to a trafficker. That trafficker spreads those images around. That is commercial sexual exploitation, which does fall under sex trafficking of children. So those are just things that happen on school campuses and with schools too. Like, kids are committing kids on kids crimes and they don't even know that they're committing it. So I'm a girl, my boyfriend's the football player, he now sends that picture to 30 people. Well, no one told him this is child pornography. This is, this abuse material. And so he can get charged. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because we really need for schools to be prepared for what is happening to our children. We kind of left our youth in this day and age where there's over 7 billion people on the planet, and this device, this cell phone device, your kid has access to that. And so there's predators and different things, and just where all of their information can be shared. We passed the bill, No Trafficking Zone. I co-founded an organization called NTZ, No Trafficking Zone. We passed a bill called the No Trafficking Zone. It's SB 1831. And for us, it was important because so many of the youth that we were recovering had first been groomed on their school campuses. So in the state of Texas, 55% of trafficking victims, whether they're adults now or they're youth, have said that that's where they had first been approached, whether it was on a digital device or whether it was by another student or a student that had graduated. And we're very excited about this bill because we do think that it's going to protect kids in the fact that if you contact a kid via a technical device, on Snapchat, on Instagram, on TikTok, and you try to groom them and lure them and traffic them, it is now a first-degree felony.
Oh, wow.
And some of the defenses, it could be 25 years. And that is huge because years ago, traffickers were getting deferred, or they were getting, probation. They're still bonding out all the time. Like, we have a lot of work that we do have to do, but the fact that you can get charged with that now and it's acknowledged is, it gives me hope. We still have so much work to do. We do not have the proper system set up in place for when girls are trafficked. We recover many, and sadly, some school administrations are more worried about liability versus accountability. They don't want people in their community knowing that sex trafficking can happen. And the reason why is because people don't think that sex trafficking can happen to their kids, but really sex trafficking can happen to anyone. And I'm just going to give this example. Have you ever been in love with the wrong person?
Absolutely.
And when you fell in love with that person, did you think, but, he really loves me and he's going to change, and, he had a traumatic childhood, or...
I can change him.
Yes.
Yeah, all of that. Yep.
Yes. So I haven't met anyone yet who hasn't fallen in love with the wrong person, and that kind of manipulation and you're in it. When you're in something, it's really hard. Now times that by 1 billion. And now it's like you have all of those feelings, but now you're broken. And now you could be addicted on something. You could be being blackmailed. I'm going to send these pictures and videos to your pastor. You become so broken. And it's such a toxic relationship and a trauma bond that some people feel like their only way to get out is committing suicide. Or when they have gone to law enforcement and they have told, then their lives are put in more danger. So I know when people say, oh, this will never happen. Any person that's vulnerable, human trafficking can happen to. So I would just like to say that we need to teach our kids self-worth, and we need to teach them predatory signs, and then implement solutions so that this does not happen.
I feel like this needs to be taught at home, but also in school. I understand reading, math, and all of that is important, but I feel like with the way that our society is going, that needs to be now taught curriculum.
Yes.
That's just what I see. Now, you talked about manipulation. You talked about vulnerability. But the one thing that keeps sticking out to me is trauma bonding. Can you elaborate just a few minutes on that?
Sure. So trauma bonding is very interesting. And I'm going to break this down again in very simple terms. Trauma bonding is we're going through trauma together. We're fleeing from the cops together. It's you and me against the world. Or it's when you were walking on the track or the blade, or one of your tricks, who is a person that's buying you, starts beating you, and I save you. Like, I jump in, I help you. Trauma bonding really works when a relationship happens and people go through all of these traumas together, and there becomes this bond. And in some ways, bonds are very healthy, but how these bonds are developed is very unhealthy. But because it's so unhealthy, but there's such a grip, and you have not gone through these experiences with anybody else, and nobody else would understand. This kind of trauma bonding is really hard because when you're recovering victims off the streets or wherever, they go back. It's like domestic violence. It's going to take 7 times at least when they go and they go back. It's a cycle. Because even when they leave, you are so codependent. You start thinking about like your trafficker, or well, what if somebody else takes your spot with your trafficker? Even though this person has abused you and violated you and sold you, that trauma bond is really, it's got such a strong grip. I just like to say, like, imagine someone like that you can't see physically has a grip on you, and you just can't get away. That's what trauma bonding really is, emotionally.
It sounds like a stronghold.
Yes.
Like a fortified stronghold.
Yes, that's exactly what it is.
And so what happens is, so you're saying they connect with their trauma.
Yes.
So my dad got a divorce. Mine did too. That's an example. Yeah. Or you were in an abusive relationship. I was too. So they connect at their trauma. Is that correct? Okay.
They connect at their trauma, but then they're building their own trauma.
Okay.
And then on the other end, though, that person doesn't have that trauma. The predator, they're just, their job is to find out all the vulnerabilities and then connect to those vulnerabilities.
Okay.
To start changing them, to start turning them inside out.
Okay.
But yeah, it is that connection.
All right. Very, very interesting. Again, now you mentioned manipulation, trauma bonds, vulnerability. When you were talking, I also thought about boundaries.
Yes.
Children need to be taught boundaries. In our society, we have no boundaries.
Yeah, oh no.
You can have access to me anytime you want. And so I feel like on I guess, nationwide level, that has been taken away from us. And I feel like it needs to be put back, taught to our children. Individually with self-worth and self-esteem. So I feel like all that should just be a class in school at an early age.
Yes, and that's exactly what it is like with the boundaries. So there was a law there's a law that was passed this session, which is really frustrating, where any advocacy groups or trauma specialists, we can't go in and train about sex education and sex trafficking, and they put them together, which is frustrating because sex education is different than trafficking and exploitation. And so you have to get the whole school boards to agree, all these systems, and then parents. Well, a lot of parents are going to say no because they think, well, this can never happen to my child. But the problem is that in America, we have been groomed not to have boundaries. People share everything on social media. You have a child. I know that with my daughter, when people want to hug her, if she doesn't feel comfortable hugging them, I tell her, don't hug that person. One of my sisters said, well, don't have your daughter be rude. And I said, my daughter is not being rude. I am never going to live in a day and age where the things that I was taught as a female that I've carried into my adult life for my child. We were taught you do be polite. If a grown-up is making you feel uncomfortable, well, that's on you. Like, you need to hug them goodbye. If they just pat you on your little hiney, and stuff,
it's okay.
Don't be a drama queen. Don't say anything. And I'm thinking, if any person patted my daughter on the hiney, I would say, why would you ever think that that's okay? I'm teaching my daughter at a very young age to be exactly who she is and herself. And that if people make her feel bad about being that, there's something wrong with them. Because I know that as an adult, I work with a lot of children. Some children, they want to hug you. Other children do not. I would never make a child feel bad for not wanting to hug me. We need to understand as adults, but because we don't as adults understand what healthy boundaries are and healthy reactions are, we don't understand that. And so our children don't. And so what we're saying to our children is, feel uncomfortable, don't trust your instincts, put yourself in very uncomfortable situations so that you make other people feel comfortable so that you're not considered a troublemaker. And that to me is like very dangerous language and actions, because any rational adult or person with good intentions, if I was making you feel uncomfortable, I would want you to tell me
Right.
so that I could correct it.
Right.
We have been groomed as, well, I don't want to be a troublemaker. I am just, a girl. I should just keep my mouth shut and be quiet. No.
Yeah. We've been trained to be muted.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the reason for the podcast. Unmuted. Now what? So I absolutely love how you're teaching your daughter.
Thank you.
Is that what we as parents that have young children need to start doing, teaching them about boundaries and self-esteem and self-worth, and if they're uncomfortable, what to do and what to say? Would you say that to the parents?
Yeah, I would say that absolutely, and I would tell parents that we all need to take a course on boundaries because we have been trained and groomed to think like this. And even boys, and men, they've been trained and groomed that they are supposed to act a certain way and they have their own pressures. Adding to your point, though, about what's happening in schools, so since there is improper sex education and boundaries and self-worth, what happens is children now look at pornography. That is their sex education. And so with pornography, pornography is very unrealistic. It can be very violent. And so what's happening is as young as 8 years old, this is the average age now that a child is looking at pornography, which is crazy. And that is changing the whole chemicals in the brain. It actually changes the way a little girl views herself as, well, this is how a man is supposed to treat me when he loves me.
Wow.
He should, strangle me and treat me like this. And then boys are thinking, oh, this is how I treat girls. And so this is where they are getting their education. And so what I would just like to ask parents and administrations is the best thing that we really can do is have classes on boundaries and self-worth, because that is so important. And then have realistic conversations about sexual education. I'm not saying that children should go out and have sex. I'm just saying that we should not shame and mute children when we've left them in this world that there's like images of sex and violence everywhere.
Awesome. Well, Jacquelyn, I'm sorry, but this is it. This has been wonderful, a wonderful discussion about human trafficking 101. Thank you for coming and informing us, bringing us awareness about human trafficking, and we look forward to having more conversations with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.